Gwilym Simcock, welcome to the On Stage Fright. Now, you're generally considered to be one of the most gifted jazz pianists and composers on the European scene. Chick Corea called you a creative genius, and you seem to be destined to be part of the inner circle of great contemporary pianists, along with the likes of Keith Jarrett. You were classically trained and you move effortlessly between classical music and jazz music, working with some of the orchestras like London Symphony Orchestra, BBC Scottish, and alongside musicians such as Nigel Kennedy and Mark Anthony Turnage. You tour with some of the top great international jazz musicians. You have a list of recordings which is extremely extensive, and you have so many awards that they're just too numerous to list. You're also Professor of Jazz Piano at the Royal Academy of Music in London. Having been classically trained, would you say that there are any differences between playing jazz and classical piano in terms of performance anxiety for you?
Well, this is a subject which is very, very close to my heart. I think going to Cheetham School of Music in Manchester, which is a wonderful institution, a place that I felt very privileged to go to for 9 years. I was lucky to have a wonderful education there, but something that does become quite apparent when you're in essentially a very competitive environment, which these places have to be. From an early age, when you're sort of 9, 10, 11 years old, doing international competitions and playing concerts in front of many people, I think that element of the roots of performance anxiety can certainly sort of develop at that stage, and I think that's certainly what I found, really. I was introduced to jazz music at around 13, 14 years old, and very kindly, a wonderful educator called Steve Berry, who's a great player and a member of the great British 80s big band Loose Tubes, and he made me this cassette of a lot of wonderful musicians, and the first couple on this cassette really stuck with me. There was some Keith Jarrett, some Pat Metheny, some Egberto Gismonti, and what I loved about this music was the freedom of expression, and this came around at a time where, for me, already 13, 14 years old, like the concept of having to do things right, this thing about music being right and wrong, having to adhere to that and find a way of making music under those mental conditions was already becoming a bit of a stress, to be perfectly honest. So actually you could say that a large part of the whole reason my career has been what it is and that I do what I do is because of dealing with performance nerves, which is quite a big thing to have to say and to admit to and to sort of come to terms with, really. And I think for me that the concept of right and wrong and making a mistake, as I'm sure it is for many people who suffer from performance anxiety, is something which is at the very centre of how you deal or otherwise don't deal with your emotions. And so the thing I love about jazz is the fact that you can be yourself, and I love that about composition and making your own music, as you kind of build your own rules in a way, which I think for me is a primary part of how to deal with the mental processes that go on when you're feeling nervous and worried about performing. And I still have that even now. I mean, in the last 2 years I've played Rhapsody in Blue a couple of times, which is of course a very famous piece of orchestral music, which is essentially a little bit of a piano concerto, very much inspired by jazz, but pretty much all written out. In fact, entirely all written out. And that for me has been one of the most stressful things that I've done in recent years, because you're playing this iconic piece of music, which of course people know, and they know when you make a mistake. And for me, that sets all the alarm bells ringing in terms of what. I guess at the end of the day, a lot of performance anxiety, one of the primary sort of roots of the emotional mental process is worrying about what people think about you. So for me, in that situation, playing a piece of music that everybody knows, if I'm feeling nervous, then I'm thinking, oh God, I'm a fraud. They should have someone much better than this, much better than me playing this piece of music. Why am I doing it? The rest of the orchestra are going to think that I'm not good enough to do it. The audience are going to think I'm not good enough. I'm going to play loads of wrong notes. It's going to be the worst version of Rhapsody in Blue ever. And actually, if I have time to just a little anecdote, actually. Which pretty much sums it up for me. The first time I played Rhapsody in Blue was with the City of London Symphony, a lovely chamber orchestra in London. and we had a rehearsal at 10 o'clock in the morning in London, the day before the performance. And you mentioned Nigel Kennedy. Nigel Kennedy had got a couple of concerts in, which literally came in about a week before or 2 weeks before in Russia. And it was obviously, very nicely paid work, nice opportunity to go to Russia and play, obviously, with a wonderful, incredible musician. But it did mean that I had to kind of take basically an overnight flight back from Russia to get back for this rehearsal the next morning. And so I took the gig on, obviously need the money, we're all musicians. And so I got back to do this rehearsal. And basically the piano part for Rhapsody in Blue is probably about 30 pages long, something like that. And of course, most soloists in the world would do things from memory. And I think for me, one of the crucial elements where the nerves kick in is about forgetting, having a memory lapse. So I decided that I would use some of the sheet music. There was no way I was going to get near. I know myself too well to know that there was no way I was going to get near memorising the whole thing. But I kind of managed to chop out maybe one in every 3 pages, one in every 4 pages, just practice it to the point that I wouldn't forget it. And for me, that is one of the ways that I have to try and cope with memorising is just to have played something a million times, just so I have a chance of when the demons kick in, just being able to, that you've built up the muscle memory that your hands can just do it without you thinking about it. So anyway, I was, I sat down, I was absolutely exhausted, of course, and I was very nervous. I mean, there was no audience there, but it was just the musicians. And for me, actually, what the other musicians think of me is probably the most stressful thing about it. So anyway, sort of there's quite there's about 30-40 seconds of orchestral introduction, and then you're into the piano playing. And there's kind of like a cadenza at the beginning, really, in Rhapsody in Blue. The first opening gambit is about a minute, maybe 2 minutes long. And I was just totally all over the place. I was panicking, and I'm sure a lot of people will share this this experience, that when you're stressing and when you're nervous, then the normal train of thought, the fact that you think ahead to what's coming forward, totally gone out of the window. So I was just, I couldn't see the next note coming ahead of me. I know the muscle memory kind of disappeared from my hand. I didn't know what was coming next. And I would quite happily sit in a room with 1,000 people and not have any music in front of me and just play. That's a dream to me, because no one can say this is right, this is wrong. But playing this piece of seminal music, which is not even technically difficult, to be honest, supposedly as a concert pianist, I just totally panicked and I totally froze. And anyway, I sort of somehow got to the end of this run through, and I think it's kind of a tradition really with classical music. When you run through a concerto and the first rehearsal, the orchestra will clap you at the end, out of courtesy. Kind of, that's a bit of a tradition. And basically got to the end of this really very, very unsatisfying run through of Rhapsody in Blue, and nobody clapped. I just wanted the earth to swallow me up. It was was one of the sort of worst sort of moments in my musical career, really, this 10 o'clock in the morning rehearsal in a rehearsal studio in London. So anyway, I thought this is not good. This is not good. The performance is tomorrow, and basically I'm just trying to get through it here. And again, in my mind, thinking, I'm not worthy of being in this position. They should have someone who really should be doing this. I was thinking, well, not only is that not only is it not good enough to not be playing it very well, but actually just the concept of just getting through it is also not really good enough as a soloist. If someone's taking the trust and that you're going to do a job there, then you need to bring something of yourself to it. So basically I went back to the drawing board, and I was still absolutely exhausted, but I spent about 6 hours that afternoon and evening. I re-sellotaped the missing pages back into the music, just so I felt like, the music is in front of me, and this memory thing, I could get that out of the equation. And I think obviously in recent times there's been a lot of talk and a lot of discussion about soloists using music, and for me, I've gone through periods of trying to memorise my own music, and then getting stressed by that and worrying about forgetting that, and actually just having the music inside the piano. And one of the great things about the piano, of course, I can see on your pitch you've got your music rest up, but you can get rid of the music rest and just have the music resting inside, so physically it doesn't look so bad. So I stuck all the music back together, So got rid of that element of the problem. Then I thought, well, really, I've got to try and bring something of myself to this. And what do I do? I'm an improvising musician. So I found a place later on in Rhapsody in Blue where it kind of goes into a bit of it gets very rhythmic and has sort of South American inspired rhythms. So I thought, well, I'm going to open up this section and find a way of improvising over it, with total respect to the piece of music and in a way which really fits around what's happening. And that kind of gave me the feeling of justification of why I was there. I thought, right, I'm going to do something which hopefully not many people would be able to do, and would give it my own angle. So I practiced and did this and sort of inserted this little section work for improvisation, and I sort of went there the next day and I felt like the performance went well. It wasn't completely not perfect. But I felt like I was being myself. I'd sort of removed that element of nerves from the memory loss. I was giving something which I felt I could be myself with the music, and it seemed to communicate to the audience. So that it was, a very long story, but for me, finding a way of justifying myself, I think, was the root of the psychological thing there, as one issue, and then the other issue of how to deal with memory loss. And actually, I think that probably, for me, worrying about memory loss comes from there's one specific instance when I was about 10 or 11, playing a concert with Cheatham's. Cheatham's in Manchester. We would do some what we call outside concerts, so maybe 8 or 9 of the pupils would go out into somewhere regional and you'd play a concert, and each student would play maybe 1 or 2 pieces each, and then people come to watch that. So I vividly remember this. We had a concert in Macclesfield in Cheshire, and I was playing a Bach. I don't think it was even a fugue, it was a Bach invention or something. I probably got to about bar 40 or something, about half a minute in, and I had a memory loss. So trying to be as composed as you can be when you're 10 years old, I thought, right, gather your thoughts, start again. Of course, got to the same place, no chance of getting past it. So I kind of had to leave the stage in a flood of tears. And I think somewhere deep down the line there's been a psychological sort of thing that's been planted in my brain about memorising music, which is sad, really. But I think unless you really actively seek a way to deal with that, then these things can become a problem. But to me, personally now, I'd much rather enjoy the experience of making music, and I know that would communicate better to an audience. So now I'll just use the music wherever possible, and just to have it there, it's just a crutch, I mean, you probably don't even look at it half the time, but knowing that it's there is a massively important thing for me.
Sounds from that story, apart from the memory issues and the music and how you made it easier for yourself, that actually part of that was all about the improvisation, where clearly you feel so much more at home. Can you tell me what improvisation means to you and what the process is, how you work that?
It's a difficult one to answer, really. I mean, for me, I was always brought up from a very early age thinking that I could just sit at the piano and play music and not need music in front of me. And my dad, in fact, had always done that as well. He's a church organist, not professionally, but he's played once a week for pretty much all his life, and his father was in front of him. And before the services, he'd pretty much just improvise around. So I was always brought up thinking that you never needed to have the music there in front of you. And I think that's absolutely crucial, and unfortunately it's a process that's really been lost in classical music and the modern age. Everyone is trained how to play a list of pieces of music, whatever the instrument is, really. And that's kind of really sad, because at the end of it, to me, there's a certain element of playing your instrument, which surely should involve an immediate connection with that instrument, not involving a piece of Vivaldi or a piece of Rachmaninoff or whoever it is. And I definitely try to encourage people when I'm teaching, or maybe classical musicians if I'm doing a masterclass, to get rid of the music and just to build up a connection with your instrument. And I have to say, for me, that's always been a very obvious thing. I've been very fortunate to have been brought up in that way. So actually discovering jazz was brilliant. It's like, crikey, there's a whole genre of music which is dedicated to this. But I know for a lot of people it doesn't work like that. And if you've been brought up just having sheet music in front of you, then taking that away is an incredibly stressful thing. And I've worked with a lot of orchestral musicians now, with pieces that I've written where I've asked them to improvise, and they're terrified of it at the beginning. But I think that the thing that I find the most liberating about there being no parameters is the thing that which can scare a lot of people. So actually, what I've tried to do now is to subtly insert some parameters into when you say to people improvise, well, maybe you can use this chord scale, or you can use the melodic ideas of a piece of music or certain rhythms. Once you have a bit of ironically for me, once you have a bit of a right and a wrong, I think for some people that makes things easier. For me, that terrifies me. As soon as there's a right and wrong, it's panic stations. But I think that's quite interesting that people's brains can work in different ways.
Are there any pressures with improvising as well? I mean, I often wonder whether it's quite difficult and pressurising to improvise on demand when you've got a performance, a live performance, or possibly a recording.
I think the interesting thing is really that you get so used to it. I mean, as I say, really, I've never known anything else, really. So I've never felt worried that nothing would come out. Of course, I worry all the time about the quality of it. And for me, as I get older and more experienced, then the structure of improvisation has become more and more important.
Is there any difference for you between live performance in terms of nerves and recordings, studio recordings?
Absolutely, that's a massive thing. Actually, I mean, the kind of I'm sure most people would share this who have experience of both. Is that just the weight, certainly in this day and age, that the weight of pressure that what you do is going to be documented forever. For me, that's a very nerve-wracking experience. I mean, a gig has an energy, and it's a specific once in a lifetime event. Every single gig, certainly, that involves improvisation, and that's what I love about jazz. I mean, I love the fact that every concert you play is totally dictated by the hall, the instrument, the audience. You know, if you've had a nice meal, if you've just had an argument, if you've had a terrible journey, if you're tired, all those things go into making the unique event of an improvised concert. But when it comes to recording, you're quite often in a very inhumane sort of no light sort of situation, which is not really conducive to beautiful artistic expression. And actually, I found a wonderful studio down in Sussex in the countryside, which is in a large country house, and it's a residential studio. So we go down there and you stay when we're recording. And the engineer has become an incredibly good friend of mine over the last 10 years. Really, we've probably done at least 20 different albums and different types of things down there, and I absolutely love going down there. It feels like going on holiday to me. His youngest daughter is my goddaughter, and it feels like being part of the family. And actually, for me, that's a really crucial part of being able to even survive at all in that kind of recording experience, because I can somehow even begin to compartmentalize those feelings of, oh my god, it's going to be there forever, and this wrong note, people are going to listen in 20 years and think I'm rubbish, and all that, those kind of silly things which go through your head. Just putting myself in the most relaxing situation possible, and the most normal kind of, like being in a house type situation possible, for me is absolutely crucial to sort of getting through those particular branch of nerves.
The other thing I've known that you've done a lot of is the through compositions, the through composed pieces of music, along with improvisation, such as the stuff that you've done with the orchestras. Is that different in any way? What about the process of through composed music with improvisation? How does that work?
Well, I've been writing a lot of that kind of music over the last couple of years, which involves large amounts of music which is written, and then somewhere in the middle of that, usually myself, I improvise over the top of it. And they are two very different mental processes, which is quite interesting to analyse when you're doing it, because when you're improvising, you're trying to be in the moment and you're following your nose and you're not quite sure where it's going to go. And then actually when you're back into something which is through composed, for me, certainly you're back into the right and the wrong. So that definitely involves a different part of the brain. I'm no expert on the sort of actual the processes up there, but actually sort of landing the plane when you finish the improvisation, then you're back into something that's composed. You really do have to try and switch the way that you're thinking. And if you're not really looking ahead, then it's quite difficult to do that, and you can easily come unstuck when it gets back. I can easily come unstuck when it gets back to the element of the music that's that pre-existed. To help to deal with this, it's a bit like driving. Really, I remember when I learned to drive my instructor would always say, look, you don't just look at the car ahead of you, you look way ahead of that, 4, 5, 10 cars, as far as you can see, just to get an idea of the story that's coming up so you can most efficiently react to that and drive it in the best possible way. And I think it's the same with music. It's if you can look ahead of where you're going to, whether that be an improvisation or with written music, then you're best prepared for it. And I think for me, unfortunately, what the nerves do is that it stalls that process. It takes so much of your mental capacity that literally you're like a computer that's buffering really badly. You're just right on the edge of what's going on, and you're not looking ahead because you're too busy stressing about the moment. And that is one thing which, if I could wave a magic wand and have total mastery over it, I would choose to be like, where you're always looking ahead. And you can see what's coming, and you're not sidetracked by the voices and by the ways that that can physically and mentally manifest itself.
So how do you manage the different elements of performance anxiety? And you've talked about some areas being more difficult than others, but when you're working with a bunch of fantastic jazz musicians, what is it like then?
It feels like the most privileged thing in the world when things are going well and you're playing with great musicians. Then you're just in the middle of this wonderful conversation. It's like being down the pub with your mates and you're talking about your favourite subjects and you're all having a fantastic time. You wouldn't rather be anywhere else, and it really does feel like. I think for me, in my particular sort of specific career, it's when you're playing on your own that's the problem. And that for me has always been a massive challenge, is playing solo piano concerts. And in the last few years, I feel like, hopefully, touch wood, I've got better at dealing with those and better at expressing myself. But certainly in the first couple of years I was playing my own music in solo concerts, I found that incredibly difficult because you've got nothing to work off. The beautiful thing about jazz and improvisation is working off other people's ideas. Again, with a conversation, somebody says something, you take it on, something that you might not have thought of in the first place, and that's beautiful. That's a wonderful thing, and I think hopefully that's a lovely thing for people to observe as audience members. But when you're on your own, you don't have that. It's like a monologue by its very nature. You only have your own ideas to work from. You don't have that distraction of a conversation. You've just got yourself and then the thoughts going around your head. And those are the points where you get the voices telling you all the terrible things that you are and that you're a fraud and all these crazy things which people would be astounded if they knew what was happening as you were playing. And unfortunately, I guess one of the things is you do get good at just dealing with it. I say unfortunately because it would be nice to, of course, eradicate it in the first place, but there's a certain element of just coping with it and finding a way of making the type of music which you feel you can survive and do as good a job as possible whilst all this nonsense is going on. And I think for me, I've had to think about this a huge amount, and I went through the process of then at one stage trying to write more involved through composed music. So then, I mean, this is absolutely crazy. It sounds crazy as I say it. I'd write more through composed music so I could practice it more, so I have more of a chance of getting it, inverted commas, right. And of course, that's absolutely ludicrous because the very thing that it does, for me personally, especially, is it gives you a chance of getting it wrong, which is exactly the thing that's screwing you up in the first place. So certainly in the last few years, I've tried to write music which is a lot more free. The things that the written elements I have at least the notes of on paper inside the piano. So I know that they're there, so I don't have to worry about forgetting about them. But certainly trying to find a way of leaving a more expansive space for the improvisation so that actually you can go off on a tangent. And when you are off on that tangent and you're in the moment and in the pretentious word, in the zone, then the voices just disappear because you're so much enjoying yourself in the process of improvisation. But certainly for me, that realization that I was doing the total counterintuitive thing and trying to actually making things harder for myself, was like, oh, what are you doing? Idiot. So I'm happy to say that I'm aware of that. I'm trying to find a way of making the music which for me allows myself to relax. And as an audience member myself, you clock it in a second what the atmosphere is and what the mental processes are that are going on. If you're playing with an assurance and a confidence and that thing where you're one with your instrument, which is what we all aspire to, then as an audience member you think, oh, I'm in safe hands here, and this is fantastic. But you very quickly, well, in a second, you can see when someone's a little bit nervous, and it makes you nervous as an audience member. You're like, oh, is this going to be okay? I'm worried for the person playing, and I'm not, and you're not enjoying it. And actually, again, when I'm teaching jazz students, not that you ever want people to put on an act, but just the kind of the physical way that they are with their instrument and the way that they perform. It's actually a crucial element of music making, which I think a lot of people don't always acknowledge and they don't always think about. You know, we do all listen with our eyes, is the sad truth of the matter. So actually, the way that you perform and you kind of put yourself across on stage is a huge element of how much people are going to enjoy what you do. And of course, you don't want that just to be manufactured and false. But there is, of course, with human nature, a certain element of the fact if you try to put those things out and to show that outer experience of assurance and confidence in what you do, then a certain amount of that feeds back into how you actually feel, because I think that's just the way that it works mentally. So hopefully that helps a little bit for people when they're maybe slightly less experienced at performing in maybe high pressure situations. It's just sort of that outward way that you are and the way that you communicate. I mean that's the key word, communication. How you communicate your ideas and communicate the music is absolutely crucial to what people perceive and how they perceive you are as a musician and a performer.
It sounds as if there's a whole mixture between that sort of critical inner voice that kind of gets in the way, and then on the other, the flip side, the thing that really helps you personally, and I think probably all of us, with the whole issue of performance and performance anxiety, is just the freedom and the enjoyment and the fun of it. Would you say that's what it is for you?
Oh, God, absolutely. Totally. I mean, you play music, you play in a sandpit when you're a child, you're playing. It should be a joyful experience. And I have to say the music that I'm always drawn to as a listener is music which allows me to feel joyful and that I can connect with it and absolutely love to listen to. Hopefully it is that kind of escape from other things which we have to deal with, both as a listener and as a performer. So I think it's absolutely crucial that the music does allow you to do that, to have that joyful experience.
Do you feel that the musical culture that we're surrounded by, which could be the profession, our musical education, all of that, do you think that there's something that we can do or something that can be done to help musicians deal with performance anxiety and play with that greater sense of freedom and enjoyment?
Well, I think just a more general awareness of it is a crucial. It's brilliant what you're doing, I have to say, because that this is the absolute crucial element of it. I never had classes at school or music college telling me about this kind of stuff. Nobody really talks about it. Everyone's too scared to acknowledge it really a lot of the time. And I do a lot of masterclasses, one-off masterclasses if I'm playing a concert somewhere. And especially if you're working with teenagers, say, or people slightly older or slightly younger, then when you're doing these masterclasses, that it's so palpable, the kind of nerves that are involved playing in front of your peers, for instance, that quite a lot of the time I end up sort of just stopping it and trying to start a sort of interaction about this very subject, because we can look at what chord scale to play or this rhythm that we can do over this or this fingering, but actually making the most out of your performing life, you can get so much more, percentage-wise than just learning a few different musical things. Actually being able to play to your maximum potential for as much of the time as possible is a far greater thing, and hopefully a far greater gift to give as an educator than more musically specific things. I mean, if you ask a room full of teenagers in one of these masterclasses, say, who gets nervous? Everyone's actually too nervous to even say that they get nervous, which is hilarious, really, because probably 90%, if not more, of the people in the room are scared. They're scared to get up and play. They're even scared to express an emotional opinion about something, because that's just how people can be at that age, certainly. But actually, I take great pleasure in a way in talking about the issues that I've had, because I've got no problem with that at all, and I would love to help people who are in the same situation. It's something that, unfortunately, if you have to deal with it, then it's a big thing to deal with. And I think there's no one way to solve the problem. You have to get to know yourself as honestly as possible and find a way to kind of find the antidote which is most specific to you. But the first step in that is, of course, with a lot of things in life, is acknowledging that and being comfortable with being at the beginning of the journey. So I think the more people who can and sort of talk about this and be candid and open and frank about it, the better, really, because there's a lot of us all in the same boat. It's not just something which happens. If you're there as a person, it's not just happening to you and everybody else is cool and everyone else is brilliant. It's not like that. There's a good chance that the people that you're sharing a stage with are also, suffering from that. And unfortunately, at its worst, I know very many sadly examples of people who end up drinking too much or doing drugs or other things, all because of the stresses that they put on themselves because of performance anxiety. I'm thankful that it's not got to that stage with me, again, touch wood, but I know it has for people. So that the earlier that you can be aware of this, and the earlier that you can take the first steps to try and address it, then the better for you as a human being, I think.
And going back to the whole theme of freedom and enjoyment, tell me what it feels like for you when everything's really going well on stage.
Well, as I say, it's the most privileged, beautiful place to be, really. You're going to do what you love. For me, what I've spent my whole life doing since I was 3, invariably with people who you love to do it with. So it is just like being with your best friends, doing the most perfect thing you can imagine to do. You really feel at one with your instrument. You're not thinking, oh, what am I going to play over this C major 7 scale, or what beat of the bar are we in now, or what's happening in 8 bars time. You just do it, and again, it probably sounds a bit pretentious, but it just kind of flows out, and that's a really privileged position to be in when that actually happens. And of course, it doesn't happen all the time, but when it does, it makes everything worth it. It makes all the difficult things worth it for that experience. And again, to be able to share that with an audience and to communicate that to the audience is a beautiful thing to be able to do. And I'll never ever tire of that, and I'll never ever forget what a privileged position I am personally to be in, to be able to do that for a career and a living.
Gwilym Simcock, thank you very much for talking to me. I've really enjoyed it.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.